Hello and welcome back to 7 Minutes of Sport. We're recording this episode on a late Friday afternoon, and I'm well aware that this recording stands between us, the weekend, and a very large glass of wine. So I'm going to jump straight on into it. I'm joined today by the most fabulous guest. She is a senior lawyer at the British Horseracing Authority, who specialises in particular in safeguarding. She has a wealth of experience in the regulatory sphere, having worked at the NMC, the FCA, and UK anti-doping, and she really is a true specialist in her area. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Claire Parry. Claire, hello, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Chrissy. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for joining us, especially on a Friday afternoon. So just for the listeners' benefit, we're going to be discussing the BHA's Safeguarding and Human Welfare Strategy, which is actually posted online, and we'll talk about that later on. Now, I won't go into it too much, as of course I'm going to be lobbing questions at you about this document. So I have the timer ready. So the only question left is, are you ready?
Absolutely. Bring it on.
Lovely. Well, that is the timer started. So, as already mentioned, the BHA's Safeguarding and Humour Welfare Strategy for 2024 to 2027 has been published online. So, just as an overview, what is actually the purpose of this document?
So, the purpose of the strategy is to set out all the ways in which the BHA is going to safeguard its participants. The vision is to create a culture of respect in racing where everyone is able to participate free from abuse. And as the governing body of the sport, we recognise that human welfare and safeguarding must be a really high priority for the organisation. And the strategy is aimed at protecting all of its participants, which we hope in turn will lead to greater staff retention rates and ultimately improve everyone's experience within the sport. We want racing to be seen as a great place to work, and we want to avoid the situation that we understand a lot of trainers face. So trainers being the kind of primary employer within the industry. You know, they're faced with a lot of staffing issues. They have a lot of people join, and for whatever reason they're leaving the organisation, and we can't seem to keep them working within the sport. The BHA safeguarding team, it was set up back in 2018, and it's actually recently been renamed as the Safeguarding and Human Welfare Team. And that the inclusion of human welfare is reflected in this strategy document as we aim to move towards a safeguarding for all model. So we recognise that the sport has a duty not just to protect its most vulnerable participants, but everyone who's working and competing within the sport. This recognises the fact that any one of us can become vulnerable at any time, whether that be through circumstances or health reasons. So we just want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to safeguard everyone. The strategy document itself, the ultimate aim, as I said, to create this culture of inclusion and protecting all of our participants, is underpinned by 5 sort of key pillars that all of our aims are attached to. These are leadership, so embedding a culture of safeguarding that recognises the importance of safeguarding from the very top of the organisation. So that includes things like training BHA board members and having senior leaders within the organisation who understand the importance of safeguarding and can make sure that all of our staff are aware that this is an obligation that falls to everyone. Safeguarding really is everyone's responsibility. The second is governance, and I suppose as a lawyer, that's where I come in especially. And this is really about having a robust regulatory framework which enables the BHA to investigate and ultimately prosecute and impose penalties on participants who breach our regulations or our code of conduct and pose a risk of harm to others. The third is prevention, and trying to create an environment where it's as difficult as possible for abuse to happen, and where participants feel that they can call out poor practice at an early stage, and they are aware of misconduct, they're aware of poor behaviour, and they feel that they can report it either to their employer or to the BHA. The next is protection. So we're continuously working with our wider stakeholders. And as Chrissy, I know that you know, the stakeholder landscape in racing is quite complex. There are a lot of stakeholder bodies who have an interest in the BHA and the way that we conduct ourselves. And the protection element is really about engaging with those stakeholders and making sure that they are invested and made aware of all the things that we're doing as part of this strategy to really help embed that culture of respect across racing. We've recently had a code of, well, I say recently, time flies when you get to my age. In October of 2022, we had the Code of Conduct, which came into force, which set out a number of behavioural standards that we expect participants to meet. So that protection element is really making sure that culture that's reflected in the Code of Conduct and within our safeguarding regulations is respected and adhered to across the sport. The final one is empowerment and education. And this is really key to make sure that participants understand what is misconduct and understand what poor practice looks like, and therefore how they can expect it to be treated. So that just, it really engages that kind of empowerment aspect to help participants to really speak out when they have got a concern. And then after that, making sure that the industry is aware that these people should be protected, and making sure that they are supported, so they don't feel the need to kind of leave, or they can be expected to be supported after they've raised a concern. The safeguarding, as I said, the safeguarding team was set up back in 2018, and the first set of regulations came into force in January 2019. And since that time, the safeguarding team has been gathering case data, and that's been really important in drafting this strategy document, because instead of relying on anecdotal evidence that we were seeing in cases, or our kind of general kind of perception of what was going on, we could actually look at the hard data and use that to identify key themes that the BHA wants to tackle. So we analysed all of our case data, had a look at the numbers, and the two themes that we identified that are picked up on in this strategy document are sexual misconduct and bullying. So since the safeguarding team started gathering this data, 26% of all of the concerns that came into the team related to sexual misconduct, and that's across the full spectrum, right from the most serious allegations of rape down to kind of low-level poor practice of perhaps inappropriate comments and things of that nature. Wow. And the second one is bullying, which accounted for 22% of the cases that were reported to us. And those two things, those two kind of two key areas, are the two things that we really pulled out of that data that, as I said, we really want to tackle and address moving forward in the life of this strategy document.
And you've already touched on this somewhat, but what would success in this strategy look like, in your opinion?
So broadly, success would mean creating a culture where both misconduct and poor practice is recognised, it's reported, and it's addressed, whether that be through the more formal prosecution route under the regulations and ultimately a risk management penalty being imposed, or through education and working in a more engaged way with participants, ultimately leading to an improvement in the culture across racing's workforce. It can be quite difficult, I think, to measure a term like culture. It's quite a nebula concept, and it can be quite difficult to kind of pull things out of that you can objectively measure against criteria. But what the strategy document has tried to do is to pull out some specific tasks, some specific projects, and give timelines to those projects to help set a path forward so we can make inroads into the wider culture piece. The key marker for us, I think, will be the number of safeguarding concerns, sorry, I should say safeguarding or human welfare concerns, that are reported to the BHA, and combined with that, looking in a bit more detail about the nature of those concerns. Part of the strategy, and I mentioned earlier, one of the key pillars that underpins it is this education piece. And it's fair to say that with additional education being delivered to participants, to a greater number of them, to a broader range of roles within the industry, we can expect an increase in the number of safeguarding concerns that we see, and that's to be expected, and I would hope that would happen as participants have a greater understanding of safeguarding and of proper behaviour and standards of behaviour that we would expect. But ultimately, we would like those figures eventually to start to decline, and we would also like to see where we are getting reports that the seriousness of the allegation is reducing in its level of seriousness. So we're seeing less of the most serious cases, and perhaps, you know, we're picking up more of the lower level poor practice, which we have an opportunity to step in and address through proactively and through education across the board.
Absolutely. And on actually the note of looking forward, and for the listeners, I'm well aware the 7-minute timer has gone, but I'm knowing the answer to this question, so I'm going to ask it anyway. And if you did just want to listen to 7 minutes, you can turn off at this point. I want to know the answer to this. So looking forward to 2 years ahead, for example, what are some of the milestones that the BHA are hoping to achieve?
So we have been very ambitious in the number of milestones that we've set for ourselves. I'm not going to lie, there are quite a few, but there's 3 key ones that I wanted to pick out. I've already mentioned it, I think twice already. The first is education. This is really key to the strategy, and we are going to be delivering role-specific education. In racing, there are a number of different licensed roles, and we want to make sure that the education that we're delivering is specific to the type of role that participant is doing. The second thing is we're going to be introducing a DBS policy and introducing DBS checks to some of the licensed roles within the industry. And that is a project that I'm working very hard on, and I'm really excited to see that come to fruition, hopefully next year, all things being well. And the final thing, which I think is really exciting for the industry, is the introduction of a safeguarding champion role. Part of the strategy is really going to be looking at how we can, as I said before, empower our participants to take safeguarding more seriously, to embed it within working practices on yards, and introducing a safeguarding champion to yards, somebody who works within an organisation, works within a licensed training yard, who is given specific education for that role, who can act as a point of contact for concerns, for a point of information to signpost people onwards, and have that link in with the BHA, I think is a really exciting prospect for the industry. And hopefully will empower trainers and those working on licensed yards to really to embed safeguarding within the practices on that yard, and hopefully will go a long way to making sure that we are receiving concerns, but also working really well with yards to try and help improve their practices where we can.
Absolutely. It sounds like a very good time to be working in safeguarding at the moment.
It is. The strategy document was a fantastic step, and it is really exciting. It did pick up on some issues that we had that were reflected in our case data, but this document represents a real step forward, and it had huge buy-in across the industry from various stakeholder bodies, including the BHA board. So we're really excited to try and hit some of these milestones and put into practice all of the things that we've all of the projects and all of the milestones that we've identified in the project. We can't wait to get stuck in.
Oh, it's great to hear that. And Claire, I have to say that does bring us to the end of the questions and the timer, even though the timer may have gone off.
I'm so sorry. I did suspect we might run over, Chrissy, but
not at all. Like I say, I could have ended the podcast there, and I wanted to hear the answer to those questions. So thank you so much for joining us today. And if anyone wants to read that safeguarding and human welfare strategy, if you just give it a simple Google, the document will come straight up. So you can read it in more detail online. And I'm sure that a lot of people after listening to this will go and do that. So Claire, thank you so much again for joining us today. And thank you so much to the listeners. We hope that you tune in next week and hear us then. For now though, goodbye.